They told me money was tight, that I'd be fine on my own, that I was responsible enough to figure things out. So I did. I juggled 2 jobs, skipped more meals than I can count, and studied late into the night. On an old laptop with a screen that blinked like it was on life support. Still, I made it. I graduated. When they called my name, I didn't expect to see anyone in the crowd. But there they were, my parents sitting front row, clapping like they'd always been cheering me on. That should have been the hardest part. But it wasn't. What really broke me was discovering the check they'd written to cover my sister's tuition 2 years before. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. So when they handed me the mic on stage, I said something I hadn't rehearsed. Their smiles vanished. My name is June, and this isn't a revenge story. It's a story about truth, about what happens when the people who raised you give everything to someone else and expect you to be proud just to stand in the background. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, I hope this helps you feel just a little more seen. The Witt residence sat near the edge of a pine-lined street in Bozeman, Montana. Picture perfect. Blue shutters, a white swing on the porch, flower beds arranged like something out of a magazine. Inside, the walls were covered in family photos, ski trips, church portraits, 4th of July barbecues and matching shirts. But if you looked close enough, you'd notice. Jenna Whitlow's smiles were always half a second too late, always a little too rehearsed. Jenna was the oldest. Quiet, careful, always sketching in spiral notebooks or flipping through old issues of interior design magazines. She was the kind of kid who'd fix a broken cabinet before asking for help. The one who baked her own birthday cake when no one remembered the date. Her younger sister, Avery, was all spotlight. Bright, loud, always the lead in the school play, always winning local awards. Their mom, Deborah, introduced her with pride. "She's my little star." As if Jenna were just background. When college letters arrived, Jenna found hers under a pile of bills and flyers. Montana State. Interior design program. The one she'd dreamed about. Local. Affordable. Hers. She hadn't told anyone she'd applied. Before she could share the news, Avery flew down the stairs, screaming about her acceptance to a prestigious pre-law program, glossy brochure in hand. Deborah came running. She hugged Avery like she'd just won the lottery. "This is huge, baby," she said. "We have to celebrate." That night, the living room turned into a party. Boutique cupcakes, gold balloons, sparkling cider in the fancy glasses. Avery spun around in a dress she'd bought just in case, while Deborah scrolled through Pinterest dorm decor. When Jenna finally mentioned her own acceptance, Deborah barely looked up from her glass. "Oh, that's nice, sweetie." "Solid choice," she murmured, and turned right back to Avery. Jenna perched on the armrest of the sofa, her college acceptance letter folded neatly in her lap. The room buzzed with laughter. None of it directed her way. 2 evenings later, the family called a money talk over dinner. The table was set with real linen napkins and the good dishes, a candle flickering in the center, as if they were marking some kind of ceremony. Instead of a conversation, Jenna's stomach tightened. James cleared his throat with the weight of someone preparing to make an announcement. "We've reviewed everything," he began carefully, "and we've decided we can financially support one of you through college." Jenna didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Deborah took over from there, resting a hand gently on Avery's arm, like that gesture sealed the decision. "You've always been so capable. Jenna, you've got such a good head on your shoulders. You'll find a way." She turned her smile toward Avery. "But pre-law is no joke. And living in Chicago will cost more than we expected. Avery's going to need our full support." Then James delivered the final word like it was a natural conclusion. "You'll manage, Jenna." It wasn't said with malice. And somehow that made it worse. It was spoken in the same tone someone might use to ask for more butter. Avery stared down at her napkin. Deborah gave a small, satisfied nod. Jenna forced a smile, a tiny, practiced movement. "All right," she murmured. She didn't speak for the rest of the meal. No one asked why. That night, alone in her room with bare walls and a single poster of Bauhaus buildings, Jenna lay in silence staring at the ceiling. Eventually, she opened her laptop. The hinge creaked like something arthritic. One corner was held together with duct tape. The spacebar sometimes jammed. She didn't mind. She spent hours browsing scholarship listings, nonprofit funds, local grants. She built a spreadsheet, organized deadlines by color, and polished her best essay into a new document. Without a second thought, she created a folder on her desktop. The title was short and clear: For Me Only. For the first time in her life, Jenna Whitlow began to imagine a future that didn't need anyone else's approval. The rain in Moscow, Idaho, didn't fall softly the morning she arrived. It came down hard, sideways, biting, and relentless. She stepped off the Greyhound bus carrying 2 mismatched duffel bags, a roll of duct tape poking out of one, and a battered laptop clutched tight to her chest like a shield. There was no one waiting to meet her. No tearful farewells behind her. Just a cab driver who grumbled about new students and lousy weather as he tossed her bags into the trunk. Her dorm was an old, red brick building with a sagging rain, gutter and windows that clouded over from the inside. Room 214 greeted her with a rust-stained sink, a lumpy mattress that gave up before she lay down, and a heater that only worked if she kicked it in the right spot. She rolled up an old sock and wedged it into the cracked window frame to block the draft, then quietly began unpacking. No care packages. No goodbye letters hidden in her bag. Just a folded tuition invoice that made her chest tighten every time she saw it. By the end of her second week, Jenna found a job. It wasn't fancy. Not even campus-related. It was part-time work at Gringer's Millworks, a small, dusty woodworking shop about half a mile from campus. The place was run by Walt Granger, a weathered man with permanent sawdust in his hair, and the kind of voice that sounded like gravel. The shop smelled of cedar, turpentine, and stale coffee. Jenna's duties were simple: sweep sawdust, organize brackets by size, and tape up shipping labels. But between tasks, she watched how the machines moved, how pieces of scrap transformed into shape, how Walt's pencil never left his ear. One afternoon, she found Walt hunched over a city form, muttering curses under his breath. "Fire inspection again?" he grumbled, shaking a clipboard. "They want a new floor plan. My hands shake too much these days. Can't sketch a straight line to save my life." Jenna hesitated. "I can give it a shot." Walt raised an eyebrow, worn and skeptical. "You sketch?" She gave a small nod. "I'm studying interior architecture. First year." With a grunt, he handed her a pencil and a metal ruler. "Go ahead." 2 hours later, she slid a page across his desk, neatly drawn lines, precise labels scaled perfectly by hand. Walt stared for a long moment, then let out a low whistle. "You did this freehand?" Jenna gave a quiet smile. "Yeah." The next morning, her drawing was taped to the wall above the workbench. 2 days after that, a woman came in, a curly-haired customer with a coffee stain on her sleeve. She paused mid-order, eyes catching on the sketch. "You do design?" she asked. Jenna hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I do." The woman pulled out her phone. "I'm remodeling a cafe just outside of town. If you've got time, I could use someone with an eye for flow and function." That weekend, they met. The cafe was dim, a little cramped, with strange corners, but it had potential. Jenna spent 2 late nights sketching by the soft light of her desk lamp. Textbooks scattered around her, the hum of campus quiet in the background. By Monday, she had a design. Monica handed her $60 in cash and a leftover blueberry muffin. It was the first time Jenna had earned money from something she created, not boxed. Not cleaned, but imagined and drawn from her own mind. That night, beneath the flickering dorm light, she opened her laptop. The spacebar still stuck, but she made it work. She started an Instagram account, JW Studio Designs. Her first post, a photo of the cafe layout, edges curling slightly, snapped under the amber light at the shop. The caption was short, from scraps to space. She expected nothing. But a few hours later, a message popped into her inbox. Eyes Hollister, share urban build, fresh perspective. Ever think about freelancing? Let's connect. She read the message twice before her fingers moved. Typed slowly, hit send, stared at the glowing screen until her eyes burned. Later that night, long after Walt had shut the shop and the other student workers had gone, Jenna stayed. She walked the shop floor with her phone, recording the echo of machines powering down, tools clicking into place, and the creak of wood settling. Back at her desk, she saved the audio under a new folder titled For Me Only, naming the file First Paid Project, not from Mom and Dad's pocket. For the first time, her name, just her name, carried weight. Not as a tag in a family group message, but as something slowly carving out its own space, one job at a time. The moment Jenna Whitlow stepped onto the porch of her childhood home in Bozeman, Montana, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon hit her like a memory she'd tried not to miss. Inside, laughter bubbled through the air, unfiltered, familiar. Definitely Avery's. Jenna adjusted the strap of her backpack and drew a deep breath before pushing the front door open. The house hadn't changed. Glossy wooden floors, the familiar creak in the third stair. Garlands hanging slightly early for the holidays. Family photos lining the hallway. Avery's senior portraits front and center. Jenna's face lingered in the backgrounds. Before she could even set her bag down, Deborah came bustling in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a festive dish towel. "Oh, good, you made it just in time." "We're about to eat," she said, giving Jenna a quick air kiss on the cheek, no eye contact. The dining table stretched into the living room, overflowing with dishes and relatives. Jenna was guided to the far end, a shaky folding chair brought up from the basement, half-balanced near the dog's bowl. Across the table, Avery sat confidently at the head in full storytelling mode. "So then, Professor Clean says, you've got the grit of a prosecutor already." She laughed, raising her cider glass. The room erupted in chuckles and proud nods. "She's a natural," said Uncle Brent, nudging James with a grin. Deborah beamed. "That's my girl, born for the courtroom." Jenna smiled politely and cut into her stuffing. When someone finally asked her how things were going, she answered quietly, "I've been doing a few freelance redesign projects. Mostly residential. I'm learning Rhino for 3D modeling too." Deborah nodded while refilling Avery's drink. "Still at that little workshop?" she asked almost offhand. "That's sweet. But have you thought about something more stable? Like dental work or IT?" Jenna didn't respond. She didn't have to. The conversation had already moved on. Vacations, Avery's mock trial prep, Cousin Ellie's engagement. It always moved on. After dinner, while everyone migrated toward coffee and dessert, Jenna stayed back to clear plates. She was at the sink when she caught her parents, voices drifting in from the next room. Too low for anyone else, but not too low for her. "Avery needs this," Deborah whispered. "She's our best shot at something big. Something that matters." "And Jenna?" James asked, rinsing a dish. "She'll be fine. She always is. And if not, well, it's not like we sunk anything into her." Jenna froze. The plate in her hands didn't fall. Her heart didn't race. She didn't blink away tears. Instead, the words settled like dust on an already long-forgotten surface. Confirmation of a truth she had always sensed, but never heard spoken out loud. Later that night, Jenna sat cross-legged on her old twin bed. The room smelled like lavender from an air freshener. Avery had stuck in the vent years ago. One half of the room had become storage. Prom dresses, old curling irons, boxes labeled Avery, don't touch. Jenna didn't touch them. She had no reason to. The only light came from her phone screen. She stared at a design she'd finished earlier that week. A cozy corner reading, "Nook repurposed from salvaged pews and antique glass designed for a woman, renovating her bookshop in Lewin." The curves were intentional. The dimensions precise. It was beautiful. The design was hers. She attached the file to an email addressed to the architect, who had reached out weeks earlier. Someone who had noticed her actual work, not just her name. Subject, new design proposal. From JW Studio. Body. "I may not have a big name behind me, but I have vision. Let me know if this is aligned with your needs." She clicked send, then placed the phone face down and sank into the bed. Downstairs, the sound of silverware and muffled laughter carried up to her room, a celebration she'd never quite felt part of. Maybe that seat at the table had never really been hers. And maybe that was fine. Because while they passed around dessert and compliments meant for someone else, Jenna was already carving out something more lasting. Her own space. Her own voice, her own seat at a different table. The first time she walked into the warehouse on Division Street, she wasn't sure it was safe to stand in. Cracks stretched across the floor like faded battle lines. Ivy had crept up the brick walls, and the old support beams groaned when the wind shifted. But instead of feeling uneasy, Jenna felt strangely at home. The place felt like a mirror, worn, neglected, but still standing with purpose. "Welcome to Line 9, came a voice from behind. Riley Tarrant stood there, arms folded, boots dusted in dried paint, a knowing smile on her lips. She was the architect who'd seen Jenna's cafe layout and reached out. "It's rough around the edges," Riley said, gesturing around them. "But it's ours." Line 9 wasn't a standard architecture firm. It was more like a creative collective, a shared space where designers, artists, and students cross paths. The air smelled like sawdust and burnt coffee. Rough wooden models leaned against every wall, and the main table looked like a canvas of years of sketches and experiments. Jenna was the youngest, the newcomer. But what she brought was different. She had worked for every single step forward. Her designs carried the kind of honesty that can't be imitated. Her first project with the group was a concept proposal for the East Side Public Library, a forgotten building in one of Spokane's overlooked communities. Most of the team offered polished ideas, minimalism, steel beams, glass facades. But Jenna was thinking about something else. Something rooted, welcoming. Not a structure to impress, but one that could belong. Jenna didn't say much. Instead, she walked through the library on her own, took photos of the old beams, the light filtering through dirty windows, the cracked tiles still clinging to 1950s color palettes. At the next meeting, she unrolled her design by hand. A soft canopy of reclaimed beams would frame the reading room. Light fixtures crafted from wine bottles would throw a warm, dappled glow like sunlight through leaves. She called it a library of belonging. Riley stared at the concept in silence. "You did this freehand." Jenna nodded, bracing for critique. Instead, Riley tapped the paper. This is why we exist." A few days later, the team visited the site again. As they walked the perimeter, a man in a corduroy blazer and worn leather boots stepped through the double doors. "Line 9?" he asked. "I've been hearing about you." It was Professor Harlan, Beck from the University of Washington's School of Built Environments. Word had spread about Line 9's grassroots approach, and he'd come to see what was real. As he circled Jenna's mock-up, he paused. "Who designed the lighting concept?" he asked. Jenna raised her hand. "Jenna Whitlow, undergrad, University of Idaho." He studied her for a moment. "Ever considered research in adaptive reuse? We've got a project out in Juan that could benefit from a new perspective." That evening, Jenna scribbled the word possibility in the margins of her sketchbook, a word she hadn't let herself think about in a long time. The following weeks were a blur of late nights and early mornings. She rotated between studio brainstorming sessions, freelance assignments, and part-time research on Beck's urban renewal initiative. She wasn't just refining how she drew lines, she was learning how to stand behind them. Then one Wednesday afternoon, Riley burst into the studio, waving a folded city bulletin. "Spokane Civic Center redesign," she announced, breathless. "City funding approved. Huge exposure. They're accepting submissions from community collectives." A wave of energy moved through the room. Jenna stayed motionless for a beat. She knew that building. Her father, James Whitlow, had spent years working there, facilities and operations, and yet her name had probably never once come up inside its walls. Not during meetings, not in passing conversations, not in casual chats by the coffee machine. She'd been invisible there, too. She didn't say anything. When it came time to choose a team lead for the proposal, the room was quiet until Riley spoke. "I nominate Jenna," she said without pause. Jenna stood before the internal review board with nothing but a foam core presentation board labeled by hand, textured with reclaimed materials. Her voice was steady. Her design wasn't glossy or dramatic, it was grounded. A plan shaped around community needs, using familiar materials, with walkways designed for real people, families, elders, kids, not just optimal flow. 3 other firms brought polished presentations with animated fly-throughs and sleek slideshows fit for a product launch. Jenna's pitch told a different kind of story, one that didn't need special effects to resonate. When the session ended, the committee selected her proposal. Not because it dazzled, but because it felt authentic. It felt like Spokane. It respected what already existed and gave it space to grow. That night at line 9, Jenna sat in the dim glow of her laptop. She opened the layout file, reviewed the final draft, adjusted a few margins. At the top, she typed in the title, and below it, in bold, J. Whitlow, lead designer. This time the name didn't feel borrowed or heavy. It wasn't a remnant from a family line that never quite understood her. It felt like it was finally hers, and it felt like the beginning of something lasting. The call came on a foggy Sunday morning, just as the sun started bleeding into the skyline over Spokane. Jenna wasn't trying to listen in, but the hallway outside, her parents' kitchen, had always been an amplifier of secrets. She heard Avery's voice, shaky, unsteady, thinner than usual. "I didn't know the paper was plagiarized," she said. "They're calling it academic misconduct." "I didn't mean to." Jenna didn't need the full conversation. She already knew the tone. She'd heard it enough growing up when Avery twisted truths and their parents, twisted them, further to fit a palatable story. By lunchtime, the official narrative had taken shape. Deborah stood at the head of the table, flipping the roast in the pan like she was on a morning show. "Avery's decided to take a wellness semester," she announced with a serene smile. "She's prioritizing her mental health." James nodded, adding, "It's just a small pause. Nothing to worry about. We still believe in her potential." Jenna didn't speak. She just watched as the room quietly digested the news, the same way they did everything in that house, selectively. The truth, of course, was simpler and far less flattering. Avery had been caught turning in a term paper she didn't write. It was a careless, easy-out decision, and the university's Academic Integrity Board didn't take long to issue a suspension for the upcoming semester. Her flawless academic streak cracked, and the once shining reputation she wore like armor started to dull beneath the consequences of her own shortcuts. Meanwhile, Jenna's life was unfolding on a different track, not loud or attention-grabbing, but quietly gaining ground. She had just come back from a seminar led by Professor Heron Beck, where she'd presented a concept on sustainable modular public seating. The design fused salvaged materials with practical urban use, an idea sparked during late-night design sessions at Line 9 in Long City, bus rides through underfunded neighborhoods. She stood before a panel of architects and city planners, explaining how each module could shift to suit community needs. A place to rest, to shelter or to gather, no excess. Just utility with a sense of warmth. After her presentation, during the Q&A, one of the judges leaned in and asked, "Have you considered applying for the Northwest Designers Fellowship?" Jenna paused. "No, I didn't think I qualified." "You do," he said. "And if you're accepted, it'll cover your full tuition for senior year." She nodded slowly, still processing. It wasn't only about the financial help, though that part mattered more than she liked to admit. It was the fact that someone saw value in her ideas. Someone outside her circle, outside her family. That weekend, she returned home, the same home where her work still seemed to go unseen. Avery stayed mostly in her room, recovering in quiet. According to Deborah, when guests asked about her, she offered a cheerful version of events. That Avery was taking intentional time off. She left out the ethics committee and the official letter of suspension. At dinner, Jenna casually mentioned, "I'm presenting our Civic Center proposal next week. I'm leading the design for Line 9. James looked up from his plate. "The Civic Center? That's where I work. I assume it's one of those student outreach projects. Just practice, right? Like mock proposals? Good practice for you." The words weren't cruel. That was what made them worse. They were brushed with encouragement, but baked in condescension, like a pat on the head that said, "Don't get ahead of yourself." Jenna smiled lightly like she always did. She knew by now how to take that flick of doubt and turn it into drive. Back at her apartment in Spokane the next day, she opened her laptop to find a new email waiting. Subject, Civic Center Project. Stage 2, Confirmation Body. "Congratulations. Your proposal has been selected to move forward for public presentation. You will represent Line 9 as lead designer. CC James Witt, Facilities Supervisor. Internal notification. She read it twice, then again. It wasn't just a milestone. It was the first time her father had to know about her work. Not because he was told, nor because he inquired, but because the system he belonged to now demanded he recognize her. She didn't forward the email, didn't take a screenshot, and didn't call anyone at home. Instead, she filed it away in a folder named Confirmed and returned to her sketchbook. Her thoughts wandered to fresh renderings, new forms, and community spaces, because not every achievement needed to be broadcast. Some wins were meant to be quietly constructed, steadily, sincerely, brick by honest brick. Spokane City Hall hadn't seen a gathering this big for a design review in years. The final pitch for the Civic Center makeover attracted architects, city planners, neighborhood advocates, and plenty of curious locals eager to learn how their downtown might transform. Beneath the warm glow of amber lights and the low murmur of expectation, Jenna Whitlow sat near the front, visible but off to the side. She wore intentionally simple clothes, black trousers, a crisp white shirt with the sleeves neatly rolled, no heels or jewelry. Her hair was pulled back in a tidy bun. She looked less like a keynote speaker, and more like someone who might be there to check the microphones. That was exactly her intent. She wasn't here to perform. She was here for the work itself. Across the aisle, her father, James Whitlow, took his place in the reserved seats for city officials. He nodded along as the mayor leaned in to whisper something, flipping through the program with one hand. Then he stopped. There it was, finalist presentation. Studio Line 9, Jenna Whitlow, lead designer. His eyes paused on the name. No shift in posture, no expression of surprise. Just a subtle tightening in the jaw before he lifted his gaze and scanned the room. His eyes found hers. Brief, flat, no nod, no acknowledgement. Then he turned back toward the podium as if he hadn't seen her at all. When her name was announced, Jenna stood. She didn't carry note cards. She didn't need them. She walked to the microphone, took a breath so quiet only she heard it, and began. Not with pleasantries, not with formal thanks. This building, she said, her voice steady, raised me more than my home did. The room fell still. Even the rustling of papers stopped. She shared stories of afternoons spent in the public library wing of the Civic Center, nestled in a chair by east-facing windows, sketching designs on pages no one would ever see. She described how that soft morning light became her first teacher. How the quiet of an unclaimed space gave her, for the first time, the freedom to simply be, without needing to explain herself. That light, she said, taught her something her own home hadn't, that places can support you when people won't. Somewhere near the front row, James shifted in his seat. Jenna didn't glance his way. She didn't have to. Instead, she guided the committee and the audience through her vision. The Civic Center, she explained, didn't need a complete overhaul. It needed to be reclaimed. Her design honored the original architecture, revealed long-hidden skylights, and added sustainable features that enhanced the existing structure. Every detail reflected memory, purpose, and quiet respect. When she finished, there was a brief pause. Then applause began, slowly growing louder. The mayor rose, followed by the selection panel, and then the crowd. Jenna didn't smile. She gave a small nod of gratitude, before stepping aside as the host returned to the microphone. "We are excited to announce," the moderator declared, that Studio Line 9's proposal, led by Jenna Whitlow, earned the top score and will receive the pilot grant for development. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the man sitting next to her father lean in. "That's your daughter?" he asked. "Man, you must be proud." James let out a short, quiet laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said, eyes still fixed ahead. "She's persistent." That night, Jenna went home, not to her studio in Spokane, but back to Bozeman at her mother's request. Deborah had called earlier that week. Her voice sugared. "We're planning a little dinner, just us, to celebrate your thing. Come home for a night, okay?" The house was warm, smelled like garlic bread and rotisserie chicken. Avery was slouched on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up as Jenna walked in. At the table, the conversation was half-hearted. Jenna waited for someone to bring it up. They didn't, so she did. "I presented the Civic Center pitch yesterday," she said. "They selected my design." Avery didn't glance up. You don't need to stand in front of hundreds to prove your worth, Deborah said as she carved the chicken. It's nice, sweetie, but don't let it get to your head. Sometimes success is just about timing, being in the right place at the right time. No one asked about Jenna's speech. No one requested to see her designs. No one expressed pride. Jenna picked at her meal, the peas quietly rolling to the edge of her plate. She understood, calm and without resentment, that they weren't truly celebrating her. They were merely tolerating her. Her achievement didn't inspire them. It unsettled them. It challenged the story they'd crafted about her, one where she struggled quietly and never rose enough to cause discomfort. She no longer needed their approval. The city had already acknowledged her. Outside, the spring air in Bozeman carried the scent of blossoming crabapple trees and freshly cut grass, like a scene from a nostalgic postcard. Jenna Whitlow stepped out of the rental car, smoothing the hem of her slate blue dress with a quiet breath. She wasn't there for herself. She was attending Avery's graduation ceremony. The truth was, Avery had been suspended and wouldn't be receiving a diploma this semester, but no one in the Whitlow household intended to let reality spoil the photo opportunity. We'll go, take pictures, and keep the mood bright, Deborah had said on the phone, sounding like she was coordinating a press release. Inside the auditorium, the stage was adorned with large banners and gleaming gold tassels. Jenna found a seat near the back, unnoticed. Her hair was pulled into a low bun. No lipstick, no accessories, just presence. Up front, she spotted her parents bustling around Avery like she was royalty. Deborah fussed over her daughter's gown, patting stray hairs, while James straightened his tie for what must have been the 5th time. Avery smirked through the attention, her posture practiced, her smile performative. Then the slideshow began. On the large screen came a flood of images. Avery as a toddler in ruffled swimsuits, Avery in cheer uniforms, Avery blowing out birthday candles surrounded by glittering balloons. There were family trips to Lake Tahoe, 4th of July, backyard barbecues and Christmas, mornings in matching plaid pajamas. Jenna's face was nowhere. Not in the background, not even in a blurry corner. It wasn't just an oversight. It was deliberate. She didn't flinch. Not anymore. But something in her chest felt heavy with knowing. A dull ache she hadn't named since she was 16. After the ceremony, Jenna lingered by the flower stand, ready to slip away unnoticed. But Deborah caught her by the arm like a stage manager laid on coup. There you are. Come take a picture with your sister. We'll share it on Facebook, show everyone how close you two are. Jenna followed without thinking. Avery stood beneath a flowering dogwood tree, her cap slightly askew, scrolling through her phone with a look of disinterest. She barely glanced up. Deborah lifted her phone, smiling too broadly, and Jenna stepped back. I don't want to pretend, she said quietly. Deborah blinked. Pretend what? That we're something we're not. I'm done playing a role just because it fits your narrative. The words weren't harsh or angry, but they closed off the moment like a slamming door. For a beat, no one moved. Then Avery looked away, and Deborah's smile faded as her hand lowered slowly, the phone feeling suddenly heavy. Jenna didn't wait for a response. She walked off the lawn with the calm certainty of someone who no longer sought permission to leave. That evening, back in Spokane, Jenna slipped off her shoes and tossed her keys on the counter of her shared studio loft. Outside, the city murmured softly. Her backpack sagged against a stool. Among the scattered mail on the counter, mostly junk and bills, her fingers stopped on one envelope. It was thick, white, embossed with the golden seal of the Washington State Office of Innovation and Public Design. She unfolded it. Inside lay an official letter. The state of Washington extended an invitation to Ms. Jenna Whitlow to deliver the keynote address at the 2024 graduation ceremony for students in Applied Design and Environmental Planning. Jenna stared at the page, reading the lines again to make sure she hadn't misread them. The letter outlined her selection, not only for academic achievement but for being the first undergraduate to successfully develop and implement a scalable, sustainable design concept while still enrolled. Her work through Studio Line 9 had caught the attention of policy panels, grant reviewers, and now, the state's education board. One final sentence made her breath hitch. The ceremony will be broadcast statewide to encourage and inspire the next generation of design Professionals. She didn't cry. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't feel the need to call home. Instead, she sat on the edge of her couch, the letter resting gently across her lap, and let the moment sink in like morning light seeping through glass. No announcement would be needed in Bozeman. They would see it, not through staged family snapshots, but live, on a public broadcast that even James Whitlow, settled into his usual seat with arms folded and remote in hand, would watch. And this time, he wouldn't be able to look away. Glenridge Civic Hall pulsed with energy like spring returning to a quiet field. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows. Quietly, cameras recorded from the back of the room. Hundreds of graduates sat in rows, caps and gowns neatly in place, waiting. Jenna Whitlow stood just behind the stage curtain, steady, composed, and certain of why she was there. This wasn't about recognition. She was standing here because she had earned every step of it herself. The announcer's voice rose above the soft hum of the crowd. Please welcome our keynote speaker and recipient of this year's Applied Innovation Award, Jenna Whitlow. Applause burst across the hall as she stepped into the light. She wore a simple black blazer, well-worn jeans, and the same scuffed boots that had carried her through night shifts, early lectures, and long design critiques. Her voice rang out firm but warm. Good afternoon. First off, congratulations. You made it here. And if you're anything like me, chances are you paid your own way to sit in that seat. The room grew still. When people say they believe in you, it's often true, until they're asked to prove it. I cleaned floors, sorted mail, and repaired office printers to make it to this stage. I know what it feels like to be invisible at your own kitchen table, but seen by a professor who barely knows your name. She clicked the remote. Behind her, images rolled. Her sketches, the rebuild of her garage-turned studio, and playgrounds she'd designed for underserved kids. Design isn't about blueprints. It's about giving space to people told they don't belong. At home, Carla clutched the edge of the couch. Dennis stared at the screen, lips parted. Lexi scoffed quietly, but no one responded. On stage, June's voice softened. You don't have to wait for someone to give you a place at the table. You can build your own, and I did. Applause thundered. A young girl from the audience approached her with tear-airy eyes. You just told my story, June whispered. Thank you. June's smile was gentle as she wrapped her arms around her. You're not invisible anymore. The following morning, June's phone rang. It was Carla. Her voice overly sweet, tinged with something rehearsed. Hi, sweetheart. We're putting together a dinner for you. Something small, just family. To celebrate. Dennis's voice chimed in faintly on speaker, uncertain but trying. Let's move on, okay? Water under the bridge. Just a big mix-up back then. June was silent for a beat, then answered calmly. I'll come. But I'm bringing someone? And she sits at the table. There was a pause. Of course, Carla replied a little too quickly. That evening in Winston-Salem, June arrived in a deep blue dress. Walking beside Ava Reyes, her business partner, and possibly something more. Inside, the house looked curated, like a photo from a magazine. The table was flawless, the silverware aligned with care. Lexi glanced up only briefly before returning to her plate. Dennis filled the space with forced conversation, asking about June's recent work in the community, and casually mentioning some contacts. We know people in the city. Maybe we can help you grow the project, he suggested, trying to sound generous. June responded with a polite but firm smile. We're intentional about who we partner with. Carla raised her glass quickly, her voice overly bright. This is what counts, family. June gently set her fork down and pulled out an envelope. Inside, an official partnership letter from the State Development Board with one bold line. We do not engage with affiliates of Dennis Witt due to ongoing conflict of interest investigations. Dennis palled, Carla stammered. Then came the second document. A funding agreement for students financially abandoned by their families. June's voice was calm. I didn't come for closure. I came to make it clear. I'm not asking for a seat at your table. I built mine. She stood. Ava rose with her. At the door, June turned one last time. Family isn't blood. It's belief. And she left. Late sunlight streaked across the wooden floor of H+, studio in downtown Glen Ridge. June sat near the window, a cup of jasmine tea warming her hands. Her sketchbook lay open, revealing plans for a shared garden space, where children could plant vegetables beside rows of solar panels. Above her desk, a page hung in a simple frame. She had written it at 18. If you ever feel unloved, create a space where love doesn't have to knock to be let in. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lexi. I'm sorry. I'm here if you ever feel like talking. June didn't type a response, but she didn't erase it either. That evening, over a quiet dinner surrounded by blueprint rolls and scrap paper, June glanced at Ava across the table. There are names we stop speaking so we can learn how to breathe again. And dishes we walk away from to make our first real meal. Ava didn't ask questions. She just nodded. Later, they stepped outside and mounted a wooden sign above the studio entrance. H+Studio. For the ones the world forgot to see. June stood for a moment as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills. The air was thick with the scent of cedar and approaching rain. She didn't look behind her. She didn't need to. She was already home. Sometimes, the people meant to believe in us the most are the ones who cause us to question everything. But healing doesn't always wait for an apology. It begins with building a life, rooted in honesty, so steady and full that silence no longer wounds. We learn to choose ourselves, to shape spaces where we're no longer asking for permission to belong, but instead offering a place to those who truly understand us. If this story spoke to you in any way, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell a piece of your own journey. And don't forget to follow the channel for more stories that speak to something deeper.